Welcome everyone, welcome to today's HR Leaders Live panel discussion. My name is Chris Rainey, co-founder and host of the HR Leaders podcast. I'll be your host for today. We're super excited to have you for this discussion, which is a second in a 4-part series. We'll be introducing the concept of global fluency. In today's discussion, we're focusing on how HR can help achieve growth in new markets by committing to improving global intellect. Before we jump in, let me introduce you to our amazing panelists. We're joined by John Tomasello, Vice President of HR and Communications at Leo Pharma, Brian Dames, Chief Strategy Officer at Safeguard Global, Birgit Maillefaud, former VP of HR Organization Transformation at Coty, Lisa Colicchio, Chief Human Capital Management Officer at WCG, and Mattas, Head of HR Strategy and Organizational Development at Porsche. Welcome, everyone. How are you all?
Great. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
So it's always that moment where you're like, do I say something first? Do I be the first to talk online? Before we jump in, Brian, why don't you kind of kick us off and give everyone a quick overview for those that are new to joining us for the series around global fluency. Can you kind of just give everyone a bit of an overview?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And first, thank you to all of our panelists for joining. Really looking forward to this session and for HR leaders hosting us. Chris, you and the team have always been such a great partner for us, and we appreciate it. The concept of global fluency, just quickly, at Safeguard Global, we work with hundreds and hundreds of multinational companies, helping them grow into new markets and manage their global workforce. We consistently get the question, how do I stack up? Where am I in my evolution against my peer group? Whether it's, companies of my like size or similar companies in my industry. And we wanted to have a quantified way to answer that question. So we set out and did a pretty extensive set of research with hundreds of multinational companies, not necessarily just our clients, actually very few of our clients. And built a set of attributes that we believe describe what differentiates the proficiency of one multinational versus another. And really what we found is it falls into 3 buckets. One is it's what a multinational knows about the countries that they're in or the countries they're considering to grow in. As we know, there are all kinds of issues when we employ in a country. So there's tax regulations, employment law, there's language, currency, culture. All of that is complex and changing all the time, and that's what we call intellect. So, what does a multinational know about the countries that they're in? How, what information is changing and when it's changing, and then markets they want to be in. The second bucket is really kind of know-how. So the first is knowledge. The second is know-how. It's everything I mentioned is represented in data. So how effective is that multinational in distributing that information within their organization and reacting to it? And then the third is decisioning. So once the organization understands the countries that they're in and the countries that you could be in, distributing that data, how well are they decisioning on that information and reacting to market dynamics like we have a little thing called COVID going on globally. So all of those things together we call global fluency. So we can, in a quantified way, describe how globally fluent multinationals are in growing their business and managing it globally.
Thanks, Brian. I really appreciate it. Very concise. So I'm going to pick on you first, Lisa. for today, how do you, within your organization, how do you partner with the business and effectively manage the nuances related to running a business in different parts of the world?
There's a number of things that I have found have helped me over the years, and I think the very first thing is know what you don't know. So when you're talking about being in different parts of the world, if you haven't been there or grown up there or done business there, you don't know what you don't know. And so I've always found, don't put pressure on yourself to try and know it all. Just recognize your limitations and then get busy with what is your plan to get educated and how you can bring real value to the business. One of the things that I have found most helpful is ensuring that you have trusted leaders and advisors in those parts of the world, whether it's Singapore or France or Peru, knowing that you have a leadership team there who can help you understand the nuances of the markets and the business, and having a trusted relationship with those individuals is critical. Open sharing of information really becomes your best friend. Certainly couldn't not put in a plug for HR folks, but making sure that you have talented HR partners who sit in those parts of the world who really do understand both the written and unwritten dynamics of what it's like to recruit talent and retain talent, as well as conduct business in those parts of the world. We believe that HR plays a key role in that. And the other thing I would say is think global, but act local. And so make sure that the organization and the team, the country, whichever region you're dealing with, understands what the global mission and the global strategy is, but allow for local design, local implementation, and local dynamics wherever possible. It's usually not a one size fits all when you're playing on a global scale, but you can have a mission that inspires all and a vision that inspires all. So being very clear and articulate, but empowering the people who know best, which are usually the folks in the markets on the ground, to give you feedback and to, you need to block and tackle for them from where you sit, but empower them to run what they need to run. And then lastly, get yourself educated. There have been several new markets through the course of my career that I have been excited to be doing business in, but scared at the same time. Singapore was one of them. And just do everything that you can to learn about the business and cultural dynamics of those countries. Use your networks, find colleagues in HR who work in those countries, and get to know what you need to know. So that would be my best advice.
Amazing. Matthias, you've worked in many markets. What are some of the common mistakes that you see your fellow HR practitioners or companies make when moving into new markets?
I mean, apart from Lisa, you said nearly everything that needs to be said. I mean, I fully agree with your points. But what I have seen in some markets is that it's all about culture. If your company culture is we know it best, and so one size fits all, or what's good for Germany, the US, whatever, and we just export that to another country, then we will get in trouble, because then you don't do what Lisa just said. Listen carefully to what happens. For me, the key success factor is to interconnect, let's say, more or less these questions. I mean, you need this global. We have a global brand, for instance, yeah. So for us, it's very easy to go anywhere, Singapore, China, to convince people that this is a great brand and to work for us. But that's not enough, because then you need to listen carefully, and you need to do what Lisa just said, yeah, to see what needs to be defined locally. And when I was in China for a couple of years, I have seen a lot of CEOs and expatriates from other companies that were sent there, and they just did it the homeland way, yeah, like they did it at home, and that's not really leading to success. So I think it's you need a company culture to embrace that when you go somewhere.
Yeah, Chris, if I might just jump on that. So I think it's really interesting, the point, know what you don't know, and then having that local representation. We talk to our clients a lot about proximity of knowledge. So how far away, or how many layers away, is the knowledge that you need to run effectively in a particular country? And what's interesting in the data that we built for Global Fluency is, when you look across small, mid-tier, and enterprise companies, less than 15% have in-house or close proximity knowledge of every local market that they're in. Now, it's higher for enterprise companies, but there's a huge opportunity for small and mid-sized companies to build differentiation in their business by bringing that knowledge closer to where it needs to be from a proximity standpoint. A lot of companies sort of neglect that until it's too late in their growth evolution. John,
Birgit, feel free to jump in. Don't wait on me.
Yes, I find this notion of culture is just such an important one. I mean, it's a big word, right? And it's very elusive. Yet we know it's recognized as the biggest differentiator between a successful business and not a less successful business. And so the way I like to look at it is, I lift off the roof of a house and I look inside, and what behavior do I see? What behavior do I see? People interacting with each other, doing their work. Now, how do we make sure that we have common cultural values across a global business? That's a very interesting question for me to explore. And to my experience, it's largely shaped by the GM and the local leadership. And Lisa, to your point, it's really important that HR helps to identify the right leaders in the different markets and build a very strong relationship with them. And then there will be some hard points in the cultural values, be it integrity or trust or ownership. They are non-negotiable. And then you will marry those, again, to the points earlier made, with those cultural aspects that are important to win in those markets. In the emerging markets, for example, entrepreneurship or speed. So, yeah.
The only thing I'd add, I think, as Olben said very eloquently, what I'd add is the understanding of the customer. So it's implicit in knowing the business, but I do want to point that piece out, because sometimes there is a difference between understanding the business in a market and understanding the customer. So I always start with the customer and work backwards. And I think sometimes I've learned a whole lot from that. Certainly building credibility with the business by doing that, but it's always starting with the customer.
Mm-hmm.
Brian, if I can just tag on one last thing to what you said, because it resonated with me. And I've said this for a long time. There sometimes is a fear in leaders saying the three magic words, I don't know. And I have found that in these situations, when you don't know about a market that you're working in or are new to, not only is I don't know nothing to be afraid of, it's welcomed. Because I find the people in those markets are most happy to enlighten you and give you advice and perspective. And it is a wonderful way to build trust and credibility out of the gate, other than just trying to fake your way through it. Yes, I know Singapore. I don't. And when I said that, I was just so amazed at the people who came forward and said, let us help you develop this proficiency as quickly as we can. So don't be afraid of that. You're not expected to know everything. Humble yourself. You will be pleasantly surprised at how much people will help you learn if you're willing.
I think that's brilliant. And not only should we expect I don't know, but there's a cost to pretending you know. And that cost could be you're out of compliance. And when we initially work with some clients that are either just having their first experience growing internationally, or they're already in some countries and are looking to expand, we estimate 60% of the clients that we work with are out of compliance and didn't know it. And that's staggering. And that is a product of exactly what you're talking about, is people making assumptions about the markets that they're in, or there have been shifts that they're not aware of. And it could really be costly to the business. So there is a cost to pretending that you know.
And the cultural cost as well. If you're a leader going into that new market, saying, not asking questions and assuming you know everything as well, you're going to kind of alienate that new market and the people that work with you and around you as well. I realized that when I became a leader, one of my biggest strengths was being vulnerable and saying I don't know, is that it empowered my team to do their best work that they do as well. John, I'd love to throw this one to you. When you move into new markets, how do you identify where the talent pools exist in terms of acquiring new skill sets in your organizations that you need to thrive, not just now, but as we kind of move forward into the future?
Yeah, it's related to something the panel had already pointed out. You have to understand the market you're working in. Just like every market may have its own business strategy, there has to be a talent strategy woven into the unique strategy in the unique market. it's through that discovery period and involving the local markets that you figure out where those talent pools are within the market you want to explore. And then you can build a plan with the markets. I think the biggest mistake I've seen, sometimes too much, is from a global standpoint. We think that we can determine how to get talent in our growth markets by not involving the local teams, business, HR, the people who understand how things work. So it's really about, to Lisa's point, it's admitting what you don't know, enrolling people in the market, and then building a plan.
I guess I do have maybe more of a question than an add-on comment. As I mentioned, there's so much complexity per country. I mean, even the cultural issues aside, just the regulatory issues, currency conversion, and all of that knowledge that you need to have to effectively operate within a country shifts and changes over time, and all of that is represented in data. So how much effort do each of you put into the process of saying, look, we need that close proximity to all this information to be successful in a country, but we also need to normalize it so we can view it more holistically. Like when we're making decisions about where the best talent is in the right areas, at some point you have to turn that information into data, and that data into analysis, and that analysis into decisions. I wonder what all of your experience has been in all of that complexity per country, getting it into a form that you can consume it and then act on it.
So that's where the HRIS comes in, right? So what I think is really important is that there's an investment in an HRIS that can house performance management and can house a talent acquisition system, an ATS, compensation, payroll. There has to be a global database that can get fed information from all the markets. And I think what I've seen done in other companies I've been with is you develop this one point of truth where you're going to get all of the data that you need, and you're going to keep processes simple so the countries can use them. And then, of course, we can talk about the customizations that need to happen per country. That's a little detailed. But generally speaking, you have the one point of truth. And then the countries can use the system, and you can sort of oversee this from a strategic global standpoint. So I think sometimes where companies go wrong is you think it's a one-size-fits-all, and you somewhat lock the countries out of this global one point of truth, and you end up making decisions without asking for the help from the local markets.
And John, how often do you see that one point of truth being aligned and agreed upon between, say, finance and HR?
So I've been through, I'm going on number 4 of an implementation like this. I've seen it done really well a couple of times, and it's done really well when the initiative is not an HR initiative. It's a business initiative that ideally becomes a multi-functional initiative. The functional spine, so to speak, IT, finance, HR. It's a strategy that starts before you start talking about what the system's going to look like. And when it's done well, it's done really well. And it's a big project, and you can feed your financial data systems into one work stream ultimately in the end that serves the business. Partnership up front. Where it doesn't work is where HR goes off, buys its own thing, finance is off buying its own thing, and there's no pre-planning.
Couldn't agree more with you, John. I think this is absolutely the magic triangle, right, between the business leader, the HR leader, and the CFO or the finance leader. So that's absolutely critical. It doesn't mean that always, if these people come together, the systems come together, though. That's a different point. And what I would add to that is it becomes even more complex depending on the chosen go-to-market model, because you might want to establish your own affiliate, and then you would have the people on your payroll, which makes things massively easier. But if you work with local partners, with a distributor partner, for example, then it gets much more complex. And having been there, leading a region with over 90 markets, then you will pick your core markets that you will want to have absolutely, to your point, Brian, be globally fluent or have absolute fluency. And then there will be other markets where you just cannot, or you pay less attention.
That actually goes along quite nicely with one of the questions that's come up in the chat quite a lot, actually, is how do you collaborate with other functions to build a strategy before this even starts? So before we even make that decision, what does the communication look like and the collaboration with other functions? How do you start that process? When does that start?
I would say ideally that process starts at the moment you identify a target or moving into a new region or space. I have found it takes a village. I'm actually involved with this right now. Going into a new country requires extensive setup if you've not been there before. And so your best friends become the village of internal partners like tax, for example. That's usually one of the biggest things you need to think about. What are the tax circumstances and requirements of registrations? The broader finance team, what will be the ongoing costs of running businesses there in addition to just the labor? You've got legal considerations. Employment laws vary dramatically. And if you have leaders that are not well versed in that, as Brian cautioned earlier, that can get you in a lot of trouble. For example, I'll just even use an example from a past life. Changing ownership structures in the UK involves a little law that folks may know of called TUPE, a transfer of undertakings for protection of employees. And if you run afoul with that, you've got big problems. Getting the business off the ground is the least of your issues if you can't effectively navigate TUPE in the UK. So thinking about immigration and, of course, local resources, having folks on the ground who have been there, done that, and can say, this is the lesson we learned the last time. This is what we would do differently this time. So it keeps going back to what the panel has been talking about. You don't have to know it all yourselves. You need to engage others and be in close collaboration. And ideally, from the start, you don't want to find out, oh, we're going into this country and we've already hired 5 people there, only to have HR come and say, we don't have a legal entity in Ukraine. So we actually have no way to pay these people, let alone fulfill social taxes and other obligations.
Is that common, Lisa? Does that happen a lot? I can see a lot of nodding.
I will say I've been in those situations where I've gotten those calls. It seems like my co-panel members have as well.
Based on our experience, 60% of the time, Chris.
Oh wow, that's pretty shocking.
Yeah, it's we see not having an entity like Lisa described. We see setting up the wrong entity, so you can't actually pay who you've employed based on the type of entity that you set up. So you have to unwind it and incur those costs again, which is, this is the stuff we do all day long. Is help people get into new countries or kind of repair exactly how they exist in the ones that they're in. To me, it goes back to that proximity thing and having somebody that has that local knowledge and how close is that to where you need it to be. What we see is where there's a lot of fragmentation and a lot of partnership. If a multinational is in, let's say you're in a couple to few different regions and many countries, the more fragmentation in that partner ecosystem, the further away that knowledge is when you need it. And that's and like we talked about, it is really can be helpful or harmful in 2 different ways. The tactical way being compliance, like we've talked about, but it's also in strategic decision making, right? So there's many different contextual reasons why all of you evaluate new markets. Some of them may be prescribed, where someone says, hey, we want to open up an office in this particular country and I need your support. Or it may be much more open-ended, where we're saying, hey, we need to, we want to build a development organization. Can you help us figure out where that should be? And all of that requires proximity to that knowledge. Well, where's the best place to hire developers? What's the social and economic climates in those markets? What have the trends been? How can I be a strategic partner back to the business that helps them make those decisions? So yeah, that local market knowledge, as Lisa said, is so important.
One of the questions that's come up in the chat as well, I want to I'm sorry for everyone who's got so many questions. I'll try my best to answer them all. A few people have asked, do you have any examples of how you've simplified some of these processes? Whether that's like taxation laws, legislation, rules, employment, regions within the business regions. I think it's pretty complex for many people.
I would recommend, and I can be known as the queen of lists, but just having a list, everything that you learn with every integration and every experience, compile that and capture it somewhere, whether it's HR, whether it's some type of shared place, because as you're preparing to go into the next, whether it's integration, market, whatever it may be, you now do not have to think on the fly when you get the call, like John says, that, oh, we've already decided this. Am I missing something? You have a list that has built on every experience that you can run through. And there's going to be the big common things, registrations, social taxes, things like that. But there's going to be nuances that you pick up from every experience that may be applicable to 1 out of 5, but it may come up again. So I think it's super helpful to have, whether it's a playbook or a checklist at a minimum of a jumping off point. Because also remember, people change who work on these integrations and expansions. And I'll just use John. John may be very well seasoned in this and has done 10 expansions into other markets, but then John goes on to greener pastures and now someone new is there who may not have done this before. So having your learnings and your processes documented as a starting point, I have felt has always been a source of great comfort and confidence that you're not missing everything. You still may be missing some things, but it's a good place to start.
I would agree, Lisa, and I would say first the list or the white book, however you call it. The second point is don't be scared to ask. I found out that, although we are in competition with a lot of other companies, you can still call a colleague, a former colleague. You can, like a group like we are here, you can ask, have you been to Taiwan? Let's have a chat about 1 hour. What are the pros and cons? What are the points we need to take care about? And the third point I would say is have partners. Have partners that support you and know what you're doing, because I don't know the full scope of Safeguard Global up to yet now, Brian, but we have some experience where we just give it a call and call the guys and said, okay, we did this together in Taiwan. Can we just talk about Korea? Because this is coming up, and then you get quite good, let's say, some checks on your list or even questions that you have to answer them.
Yeah, I've really been. I'm trying to be very careful to not start a commercial. But you really have a couple of different options. You can set up an entity, and we've talked about the complexity and the length of time that takes, and you have to make sure you're setting up the right one. It can be costly, it can be timely, which is great if you're fully confident that is the right place for you to be for that particular expansion. The second is, contracting for employment is possible in different regions and different countries. You just have to do it compliantly, and you have to understand what the implications of that is for what types of roles and whether you're doing it legally. And then there are services, sort of like Safeguard Global, we have pre-existing presence in these countries. We have the knowledge, and we can get you in country very fast. That's all I'll say about us, because I don't want to make it a commercial. But the point being is it's important to understand your options, because the entity setup is the right thing in a lot of situations for companies. But in the cases where maybe you're not really sure, you're launching into a market, you don't know if you're going to be successful from a sales perspective, for example. So you want the flexibility to pull out of that market. There are options that, where an entity might not make sense in that situation. M&A is another thing we see all the time. We've bought a company in a particular, country or set of countries. We don't have entities in those countries. we need to work out the logistics of how we transfer employment. So there are a lot of different scenarios that change what the best approach is going in. But that knowledge is important no matter which one you pick.
Which is the thread that goes across the whole panel discussion. It's think globally, act locally, right? Have to understand the markets.
A few people have asked, given current events, will you change the approach of how you move into new markets? Given people working remotely, what impact will that have? I know, John, you're still going through something similar right now. We're interested to hear, has that changed your approach and the way you do things? Because it's, we live in this digital world that we're in right now. We're not kind of flying out there, meeting people face to face. How has that affected the work that you do?
I mean, I could speak for the company I'm with now. We're certainly looking at figuring out hybrid alternative ways to work, to get to our customers, to our key opinion leaders. But fundamentally, the strategy has not changed, and we're staying the course with it. So we're marching forward at this point.
So that hasn't affected the way you're going to move into new markets and kind of expand? If the strategy is the same, it's just the way you execute on it's perhaps shifted?
That's a good summary, Chris. Yeah. Right now, it's stay the course, just shift a little bit.
Yeah. And I would say to Brian's earlier point, the proximity, especially to the customer, is still needed. So you will always need a local team that can be small and mighty, or bigger, but you will always need a local team in order to win in the market. As we said, we just need this local knowledge to expand into it. It's good to have a global partner or to have resources that can help you. But once in there, then you will still need to hold on.
Mm-hmm. What's been the biggest challenge that you've all, a lot of people asking questions around the global workforce data. I think it keeps coming back up again. What's the biggest challenge that you face in terms of acquiring or managing the global workforce data in your organizations?
I can share a question with you that we have. Just think about our structure. I mean, we have like 35,000 employees worldwide in the Porsche group, but we are part of the Volkswagen group with more than 670,000 people. And if you look at some of our subsidiaries, sales subsidiaries, for instance, in Taiwan or Korea, we're talking about 40 people only. So the question is to keep the balance between the costs and the gain. So the question is, what do you want to achieve? What's the aim? What's the target? And that's a question that we have, because if I talk to my managing director in Taiwan, let's implement success factors, for instance, or you name it, any other HRIS solution, and he would say that's too costly. I don't need that. I can do this with Excel, right? And I can do my talent management without any of your solutions from head office. But when it comes to a discussion with the VW group in Wolfsburg, then they would tell me it needs to be one click, and we need to know that the number, and precisely the number. So it really depends on your structure and the aim that you have. So for us, it's always, let's say, keeping the balance of what we really need to know, and where it's, again, think global but act local, and to see where we can make a trade-off that is good for everybody.
What we see with clients is really there's the operational process of managing the workforce on a country by country basis, and the operational management of that could be through connection into a common HRIS, or there are country specific systems that gets done in, and then there's some sort of kind of translation and integration with the main HRIS. The biggest struggle that we see is that we all, as HR leaders, want to be strategic partners to the business, right? We don't want to be just operational support. It's really normalizing all of that data. So you have, currency conversion that has to happen. You have different language references by title. You have all of this information that has to get normalized in a common way that enables the strategic decision making that we want to be globally, and that's the struggle that we see, and that we commonly help clients with, is how do I get that in one place in a common view that helps me understand how I need to be managing and how I can grow effectively globally, not just on a country by country basis. And that's the tough part, is getting that all normalized in a way that you can have one view of it.
Mm-hmm.
I would also add, please, please, please do not forget about data privacy regulations, which vary dramatically, whether it's inside the EU or coming from Asia. There are very rigid standards with hefty penalties. So while it may be a great idea for someone to sit and design and say, we need all these fields of data for all employees all over the world, let's not even talk about contractors.
Yeah.
That's a whole other question. But for employees, just make real certain, again, going back to fluency, you understand what the obligations are for the transfer and consent to transfer of that data. That is a big area of litigation, very lucrative for litigators. So don't get yourself caught in that in your quest to standardize and collect as much information. Many countries have a need to know, a need to know criteria. So we'd love to have as much data as we can about folks in HR, who's on our team, what experiences do they have, but just be mindful. That's a really big thing that I've heard stories from other companies getting tripped up on. It's not pleasant from what I've heard.
And that's especially true for coming back to the magic triangle between financial data and then HR data. So oftentimes they don't speak to another. They are not allowed to speak to another. And that makes it even more complicated. Yeah.
I had an interesting question in the chat, and bear with me because it's quite a long one. Brian in the chat said, he's part of a business is scaling very, very quickly into new markets, but most of the decisions being made are around sales. So driving sales into new markets, and there's a lot of pressure to move into these markets, and it outweighs the appropriate setup, i.e. they want to move into the markets very quickly because they're having huge sales growth, but at the cost of not doing it correctly, and they're kind of feeling that right now. It creates a lot of friction internally in his business between HR now being seen as the bad guys, and it's kind of this balance between that and not just chasing the revenue, if that makes sense. So he's asked, how can HR help organizations grow sustainably and not just as if it's sales led and money first approach? I hope that makes sense to everyone. I see a lot of nodding, so hopefully that makes sense. Good question, and a real reality of many businesses, I'm sure.
I'm happy to take this one because for me, it comes back to what I said very early on. Make sure you pick the right leader. That is so important, that the leader role models and allows the right behavior, and especially when it comes to integrity and following the local rules. So there is no compromise on the senior leadership.
That's a great point. I think what I'd add is it comes down to the planning process, right? So if I'm understanding the question right, which you typically have commercial wants to run and get their top line. The question is, who's doing the bottom line cost analysis? Who's looking at labor costs? Who's looking at infrastructure costs? And is the revenue, the chasing of the revenue, going to continue to outpace the cost or not? And I think where HR can help is pulling finance in, again, to that triangle, and trying to figure out how we advise this business that, for example, if the revenue uptick is not going to stay ahead of the cost of the infrastructure and the workforce, hold on, time out. Let's have a discussion around, what that means for the sustainability of what you're trying to do. And so it sounds like it's a very common problem, but it sounds like something that probably could be headed off before they begin chasing the revenue.
I would add there's a little bit of an art to this. Instead of HR being the bad guy and the obstacle and stepping in and saying, wait a minute, no, flip it and reframe it. It's okay, so how are we thinking about X? How do you recommend, business leader? We don't have a legal entity in, I'll just go back to Ukraine. We don't have a legal entity in Ukraine. So let's just think about practically. We want to make sure that we can do this expeditiously, but in a compliant way. What thoughts have you given to that? And sometimes that will prompt the leader to say, well, I hadn't. What do you recommend? Versus the first interaction they have is, here come the no police, i.e. HR, telling me all the reasons why I can't do something. So asking the right questions will just, to me, prompt the dialogue that then leads to a solution that everybody's part of building. And you are maybe covertly managing expectations in that process. Because when that business leader says, gosh, I didn't even think about that. Yeah, how will we pay people? Well, it may take up to 30 days to file a registration in a country, but we could use a third-party employer. There's all kinds of ideas that can come. But just ask those strategic seeding questions, and sometimes that will help drive the right discussion that tempers all the things you're trying to balance quickly.
Plus pair up with finance, because they have the same questions. When it comes to entering in a new market, setting up a subsidiary, you have tax problems on every side. So it's a magic triangle, Birgit.
Yeah, you're very, very practical there, Lisa, because otherwise, immediately, if you go with the other approaches, their defenses go straight up, right? as opposed to leading them down that, letting them lead themselves to that conclusion is very something I learned very early on when I became a leader. Is asking a great open question, let them lead themselves to that idea as well.
And I think it goes back to that knowing your options. There are different ways to approach entry into a market depending on what you're trying to achieve and what you think the permanence of that market is for you. We did work with a premier ride sharing brand. You can take a wild guess as to who that is. Who had that exact issue. They were first mover in a market was the most important thing to their brand. And it just wasn't tenable for them to keep setting up entity after entity after entity when in some cases they didn't know if it was going to work. So they would have all this sunk cost into an entity and then figure out that they were running into regulatory issues, or there were city, kind of local governments within that country that were rejecting them because of a host of issues. So entity setup is not the greatest option in that situation. There are other options that get you into market, allow you to test it, pull back out if it's not working. So there are more flexible ways. But in other cases, entity setup makes perfect sense. It just depends on what you're trying to achieve as a business and mapping back to that value.
Is there anything that you've all experienced during this process that you feel that we've missed that is really important for everyone to take away from this call?
Legal partners are critical, to Lisa's point about getting the business to understand the implications legally to what they're embarking on.
Mm-hmm.
Know what you don't know.
Yeah, they're definitely a good takeaway. One other question before we wrap up, because quite a few of you have asked around teams. How do you make sure you have the right team in your team, in your organization, exploring these new opportunities in these regions, and then how does that lead to the decision making lead to whether you actually make a decision on expansion? Is HR involved in that conversation, or are they typically brought in after the fact? Are you involved in that, due diligence of, is this a good idea moving into this region? What does that look like?
I would say sometimes. Not often enough.
It seems like most people are saying they're not involved is what I'm trying to get at by in the chat. And by the time they are involved, it's normally, there's a lot of mistakes being made and very difficult.
For me, it's a question of maturity. You can see the maturity of companies there. I think we have all seen these situations, or we have all been in these situations where we start with a project plan, talking about sales numbers and products and how we are going to figure that out. And we did not think about the team. We did not think about a correct setup, about the culture in the local team, and so on and so on. But what I've seen in the last couple of projects that we had in my company was that we have reached quite a very good maturity level, and we start with a 2 days kickoff where we talk about soft things and so on. And for me, this is, now we are where we need to be, because as I said, I've seen quite a number of projects where we started with a task list and no soft factor at all. I mean, let's just bring the people together in an office, and this is what their tasks are, and let them start working, and then we talk about how they are going to work.
Yeah, Chris, we talked about. I thought John laid out a really good answer as to how in the context of COVID, how things have changed from a strategic perspective. And I would totally agree with you, John. I don't think anything, like when I think about how we're growing at Safeguard Global, we run into a lot of the same issues that all of you do and our clients do in trying to even grow our business. So to me, strategically, things haven't changed. We're continuing to grow. We have lots of strategic plans to enter new markets. I think where we feel the impact, especially now, is more around the actual act of recruiting, evaluating talent, getting new team members integrated into the team. So while I'm completely in alignment with John that things haven't really changed at a strategic level, maybe the way that we communicate is slightly different, but actually assembling the team, getting people integrated, making them feel a part of what's going on, I think that is where we have felt it the most. I don't know if everybody shares that view, but that's what I think has changed the most in how HR is supporting us within our organization is just the physical building and integration of that team.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Brian. And we've had to do a lot of hiring in our planning, and we certainly were able to flip the idea of onboarding. Okay, onboarding is onboarding. But we enhanced it to accommodate this is virtual onboarding. I mean, not only onboarding, it's sourcing people, it's screening them, it's assimilating them ultimately after we hire them. So we wound up building a 90-day plan for people that it's just really overly intensive, acknowledging it's hard for people to join a company virtually and then figure out how they're going to work in the virtual environment. We spent a lot of time on that, and it's paid dividends for us.
As a person, John, who literally has just lived through that, I joined my company on March 9th. On Monday, and on that Friday, we went virtual, and we've not looked back since. I can attest to that. And I would add, from personal experience myself and what I've seen in others, being very clear about goals. I have seen organizations that say, we're going to put somebody in Brazil and just let them go do and figure it out. That doesn't always work out too well. If there are specific goals, you're there to uncover the market nuances. That's one goal. If you're there to build relationships, that's another goal. If you're there to assess the business friendliness climate, just be really clear, because I think if you articulate the goals, you will have a better chance of ensuring it's the right people that are doing that work, or recruiting the right people doing that work. If you need somebody to go out there and build relationships, that's a certain type of profile of person that you're looking for, whether that person is internal or external, versus someone to go in and crunch numbers and figure out real estate costs and corporate tax. That's a completely different skill set. So defining what the goals are as we're going into new markets and new countries, I think gives you a lot of clues as to the type of talent that's going to actually be able to deliver. And it makes it better for the person who's being held accountable to deliver. Not going to send somebody to Brazil to assess real estate footprint, and then they come back and the person says, no, I want to know what relationships are with clients there. So unfortunately, I've seen that in my past, which is, again, one of the reasons we love for HR to be invited in early, so we can just ask certain questions. I call it drip irrigate, to have leaders thinking about these things before things are set in motion that get very hard to unwind.
Yeah. And I would say it's not only HR, it's a multifunctional approach. It should be a multifunctional team to assess any business opportunity, or whether it's the right thing to do it this way or that way. And then you will get the best outcome.
And many HR leaders that I've spoke to about this in the past, and others say, Chris, how do you get invited? The successful ones say, Chris, I invite myself. and if that doesn't work, then maybe it's not the company you should be working at. I know it sounds pretty harsh, but I've spoke to many successful CHROs that say, I invite myself, Chris, I take a seat and as opposed to can I be part of this conversation? Well, so I'll definitely.
You get the seat, you sit in it, and you prove your value, and you'll get invited back.
I agree 100%, John. You get any piece of intelligence, you find out who you need to be talking to, and you go and you bring your questions and your strategy and your thoughts, or even just plant some seeds. That person will probably say the next time, oh, wait a minute, you know what, let me talk to John, because I remember last time we did this. Hadn't thought about John, but he had all these great questions. So I personally don't think that our leaders are setting out to shove us in the back corner. They are just go, go, go. We know this. Mm-hmm. So, you run after them and you keep pace with them, but you invite yourself. I agree with everything the panel is saying there.
Yeah. Well, I think on that point is a good time to wrap up. So before we do so, if there's, for each of you, if there's a kind of a parting piece of advice you'd give to everyone, or one thing you think people should take from this, what would that be? And also, where can they connect with you, or if they want to say hello and reach out? I'll start with yourself, Birgit.
I would say when we talk about in-country intellect, it always needs to encompass both business and people workforce intellect. And I would also say that today, that's why we're here together with Brian also, there is more help than ever with a global approach, with global data platforms that help us. Had I known this, or had I had this available 5-10 years ago, it would have been much easier. So I would say new technology and these knowledge platforms help immensely.
I'll go back to what I said earlier. Know what you don't know, be okay with it, but find people who do know and make a plan to get yourself knowledgeable. You will learn more with every single experience you have. There's no such thing as a bad experience. Experience is what you get when you don't get what you want. So it's a good thing. You will learn every time.
Yeah, John.
Think global, act local. Work from the customer backwards. In terms of how people can get in touch with, I think all of us, we're all on LinkedIn, so certainly reach out and
you've all probably got a few LinkedIn requests already, but that's fine. Matthias?
Yeah, as I said earlier, I would also start with know what you don't know. So be humble enough to ask questions. Then the second thing is have a plan, have a white book, whatever the list that Lisa talked about, that you work and together with finance, together with other business leaders and so on. And that the third thing is ask other people. So especially have partners, be it with technology or also with other questions like taxation, law, whatever.
And then, amazing. And Brian?
I think at Safeguard Global, our collective fantasy for our clients is every internal HR brand for our clients is viewed as a strategic partner to the business. And I think as HR leaders, pun intended, I guess, that is what we all aspire to, right? Is we want to be a strategic leader, not just an operational supporter of the business. So my advice would be get the basics right, get close to that knowledge and make sure that you're compliant, and then evolve into that strategic partner by getting intimate with the data, analyzing it, and providing strategic guidance to the business.
Amazing. Well, that's a wrap. What a great way to end. Thank you to all of you for joining us, and to everyone all around the world that's tuned in. It's great to have you wherever you may be right now. Also, make sure if you're not already kind of hitting the follow button on the top right side, make sure you do that. And we'll be back with the third part of the series, which will be on Thursday, the 3rd of December at the exact same time. So if you hit the notification, you'll automatically be sent an email as a reminder as well. And if you're just tuning in late, you can also click back and watch the on-demand recording. So don't worry, you haven't missed anything there as well. And so next week, as I mentioned, we'll be looking at the Global Fluency from an acumen perspective. So super excited about that. We're going to be joined by some of the world's top people analytics from some of the leading global brands to join us. So make sure you tune in for that one. Apart from that, directly below the video, if you want to learn more about Global Fluency, you can click the link there. And the green button, and we'll see you all then. But thank you so much, Birgit, Lisa, John, Matthias, Brian. It's a pleasure as always. Thanks, everyone.